The New York night sparkled like a shimmering canvas, the lights from towering skyscrapers reflecting on the velvet black sky, as if thousands of stars had fallen to earth. In the opulent ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the clink of wine glasses rang out crisply, mingling with refined laughter and the ambitious whispers of Manhattan's elite. Harper Martin stood quietly in a corner, her hands gripping a champagne flute, as if seeking an anchor in a sea of strangers. Her black dress hugged her soft curves, her natural curls cascading freely, each strand glinting under the chandeliers, like strands of mystic silk. But deep and wary, Harper's eyes betrayed a heart that had never truly belonged to this world. She was the assistant to Eric Clark, the steely CEO of Clark Innovations, a tech conglomerate dominating Manhattan's digital landscape. With her razor-sharp intellect and rare dedication, Harper was accustomed to standing in the shadows of glory, managing multi-million-dollar contracts, and quietly cleaning up messes left by others. But tonight at the gala, celebrating a breakthrough in AI technology, she felt like a bird out of its flock, surrounded by curious, sometimes disdainful glances from the predominantly white faces in the lavish room. As an African-American woman, Harper was used to proving herself, but the pressure never ceased to prick at her heart. Eric Clark stood at the center of the room, a king in his own realm. His piercing blue eyes, cold as ice, could make anyone shiver in their presence. His tailored black suit fit his tall frame perfectly, every movement exuding an unshakable confidence and authority. He was a man Manhattan revered, yet feared, dubbed the Ice King for his ruthless business decisions and the emotional fortress he'd built around himself. Whispers about him echoed through the room, a man untouched by sentiment, whose heart had long been sealed shut. Harper tried to focus on her work, jotting mental notes for tomorrow's report to Eric, but her gaze kept drifting to him. Something about Eric awed and unnerved her, a dangerous allure she'd always tried to ignore. She reminded herself to keep her distance, especially given the rumors of women who'd tried to get close to Eric, only to vanish from the tech world, or worse, have their reputations ruined. Standing alone again, Harper Lena. Her best friend appeared with a radiant smile and a champagne glass in hand. Lena, a marketing analyst with neatly braided hair and boundless energy, always knew how to pull Harper out of her shell. "You need to loosen up a bit. Tonight's for celebrating, not working." Lena winked, pressing a fresh glass into Harper's hand. Harper managed a faint smile, but her eyes flicked back to Eric. He was speaking with the group of investors, a rare smile playing on his lips when his gaze suddenly met hers. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Deep and enigmatic, his eyes sent her heart racing, a warm flush spreading through her chest. She quickly looked away, chastising herself for letting the champagne cloud her judgment. "I need some air," Harper murmured, hurrying to the balcony. The September night breeze brushed coolly against her skin, carrying the city's hum, a symphony of honks and ambition. She leaned against the railing, taking a deep breath to shake off her unease. But then, a tall, silent figure appeared beside her, startling her. Escaping already, Ms. Martin Eric's voice was low, like a melody laced with a rare, teasing edge. He stood closer than usual, his tie slightly loosened, a small crack in his polished armor. The moonlight softened his sharp features, making him seem more approachable than ever. Harper tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart pounded. "Just catching my breath, Mr. Clark. It's a bit stifling in there." She smiled, but her eyes couldn't leave his. His cologne, a blend of sandalwood and cedar, wove into her senses, making her lean closer despite herself. Eric chuckled, a rare, warm sound, like an unexpected gift. "You're right. These events are more theater than celebration." He stepped nearer, his gaze locking onto hers. "But you, Harper, don't strike me as someone who runs from a challenge." She tilted her head, the champagne making her bold. "Maybe I pick my battles wisely. Her smile carried a hint of defiance, and the air between them crackled at that moment. The city faded, leaving only them, their eyes intertwined, an electric current pulsing through the space. What happened next was a whirlwind of emotion. A witty remark, a brush of hands, his lips suddenly found hers. The kiss, fierce and forbidden, burned through every barrier. Harper knew she should stop, her mind screaming that this was a mistake, but her body betrayed her, melting into Eric's warmth. That night they lost themselves in each other, in a lavish suite at the plaza, where dim lights bore witness to impulsive choices. As dawn slipped through the curtains, Harper woke, her heart hammering. Eric slept beside her, his arm draped over her, his face serene in a way she'd never seen. But panic crashed over her like a tidal wave. She'd slept with her boss, a mistake that could shatter the career she'd worked so hard to build. She scrambled to gather her things. Her black dress crumpled on the floor and realized one silver earring was missing. She slipped out of the room with trembling hands, her heart heavy as if carrying all of New York's sky. In her small Brooklyn apartment, Harper stood before the mirror, her curls a tangled mess, her eyes brimming with fear. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice lost in the city's distant hum. She knew that night wasn't just a mistake. It was the beginning of a storm she wasn't ready to face. The faint light of a Brooklyn morning filtered through thin curtains, casting a soft glow across Harper Martin's small apartment, where everything seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos. She stood before the bathroom mirror, her hands gripping the sink's edge, her weary eyes reflecting a soul grappling with a storm of emotions. The night at the Plaza Hotel, with its fiery kiss and stolen moments with Eric Clark, still burned in her mind, a sweet and painful wound. Harper clenched her fists, trying to banish the image of Eric's strong arms, warmth, and the dangerous weight of what she'd left behind, a single silver earring, a fateful trace that could unravel everything. She hurriedly slipped into a white blouse and a business skirt, attempting to mask her inner turmoil with a polished exterior. But each brush through her curly hair felt like sweeping away fragments of herself. Harper knew stepping into Clark Innovations today would be a test. With his piercing blue eyes and commanding presence, Eric would be there, and she wasn't sure she could face him without betraying the truth. One mistake, just one, but it could cost her the job that anchored her between duty and freedom. Her phone buzzed, jolting her thoughts. Brenda's name flashed on the screen, a harsh reminder of family burdens. Harper took a deep breath and answered. Her mother's voice, sharp and critical, cut through immediately. "Harper, are you planning to disappoint me again? Jamal needs money for his wedding. You can't tell me you don't have $15,000. Don't play poor with me." Harper bit her lip, the familiar ache rising in her chest. "Mom, I'm doing my best," she replied, her voice trembling but steady. "My job isn't a money printer. I have my own life too." But Brenda didn't listen. "You're selfish. Harper Jamal's your brother, your blood. Please don't make me repeat myself." The call ended with Brenda's disappointed sigh, leaving Harper lonely. She was the family's pillar, but sometimes she wondered if she was truly part of them, or merely a tool. At Clark Innovations headquarters, the modern air of glass walls and cold white light only deepened Harper's unease. She entered the office, clutching her tablet, trying to focus on the reports she needed to prepare. But every footstep, every glance from a colleague, felt like her secret was laid bare. She sat at her desk, her eyes drifting unwillingly to Eric's glass-walled office. He was there, impeccable in a charcoal suit, but something was off, a subtle tension in how he skimmed documents, his gaze occasionally sweeping the room as if searching. "Harper, come in for a moment." Eric's voice crackled through the intercom, low and authoritative. Her heart pounded like it might leap from her chest. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and entered his office with a calm facade, though a tempest raged within. Eric sat behind his desk, his gaze settling on her deep and unreadable. He said he needed you to review the Houston contract and handed her a file. His fingers brushed hers a fleeting touch, sending a shiver. You okay, Harper? You seem off. She forced a smile, masking her panic. I'm fine, Mr. Clark. Just tired from work. But his eyes, as if they could pierce her soul, made her want to look away. She buried herself in the file, avoiding his gaze, but her heart screamed. Did he suspect something? Or was she weaving her own nightmare? That afternoon, she overheard a colleague's rumor. Eric had asked Ken, his trusted assistant, to review security footage from the gala night at the plaza. He's looking for a woman. One coworker whispered, voice thick with curiosity. Someone who left a silver earring. Sounds like Eric's determined to find her. Harper's blood ran cold. The earring, her only trace from that night, was now a living threat. She returned to her desk, opened her laptop, and began typing a resignation letter, her fingers trembling on the keys. But each time she hovered over the send button, her family flashed in her mind. Brenda's sharp voice, Jamal's college dream she'd sacrificed for. Losing her job wouldn't just cost her career, but unravel the world she'd built. Harper closed the laptop, taking a deep breath to quell her fear. She couldn't give up or let one night define her future. But when she looked up, Eric's gaze met hers from across the room, a sharp and warm blade cutting through her defenses. He stood leaving his office, and as he passed her desk, she caught the familiar scent of his sandalwood cologne, a reminder of that fateful night. You sure you're okay, Harper? He asked, his voice low and laced with concern, nearly compelling her to confess everything. I'm fine, sir, she whispered, her eyes averted. But as he walked away, a cold void settled in her chest, like a heavy stone. This secret was pulling her into an abyss. She knew she couldn't run forever, but each step in Eric Clark's world was a dangerous dance between temptation and destruction. That night, lying on her simple bed in her apartment, Harper stared out the window, where the city's lights flickered like relentless whispers. She pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart still raced for Eric, for fear and for a faint premonition that her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that Eric held the silver earring somewhere in a lavish Manhattan penthouse, his gaze pensive, as if searching for a missing piece of his heart. The Manhattan skyline shimmered under a late afternoon haze, its glass towers reflecting the golden hues of a city that never slept. Inside the sleek headquarters of Clark Innovations, Harper Martin sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, her mind a battlefield of guilt and longing. The memory of that reckless night at the plaza lingered like a forbidden melody, its notes haunting her every quiet moment. She had managed to dodge Eric Clark's piercing gaze for days, burying herself in reports and emails. But the weight of her secret, the missing silver hoop earring, the night that could unravel her career, pressed heavier with each passing hour. Harper's phone buzzed, a text from Lena flashing across the screen. You can't hide forever, girl. Talk to him or quit. Pick a side. Lena's words, blunt yet laced with love, stung. Harper wanted to confide in her friend and confess the chaos swirling within, but the fear of judgment and losing everything she'd fought for kept her silent. She glanced toward Eric's glass-walled office, where he stood, his silhouette sharp against the city's glow, speaking animatedly on a call. Even from a distance, his presence was magnetic, which drew her in and terrified her. The day dragged on, each task a deliberate distraction from the truth she carried. But her heart lurched when Eric's voice crackled through the intercom, summoning her to a meeting. She smoothed her blouse, steadied her breath, and walked into the conference room, where Eric stood at the head of a polished table, surrounded by executives in crisp suits. His eyes met hers briefly, a flicker of something unreadable, curiosity perhaps, or recognition, before he discussed a new initiative to bring tech education to underserved communities. Harper took notes, her pen moving mechanically, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the warmth of his touch, the way his lips had claimed hers under the stars. Ms. Martin, Eric's voice cut through her thoughts, smooth yet commanding. I want your input on the outreach strategy. You've got a knack for seeing what others miss. His words were professional, but the way his gaze lingered intense and searching sent a shiver down her spine. Harper cleared her throat, forcing a calm she didn't feel. She said, I suggest partnering with local organizations in Harlem. Her voice steady, despite the storm within. They understand the community's needs better than any corporate plan. Eric nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips, and for a moment, the room faded, leaving only the two of them in a silent dance of unspoken truths. That evening, Harper stayed late refining the project proposal at Eric's request. The office was quiet, the hum of the city muffled by glass walls. She was alone, or so she thought, until Eric appeared at her desk, his tie loosened, a cup of coffee in hand. You're still here, he said, his voice low, almost intimate. I thought you'd be out enjoying the city by now. Harper's pulse quickened, but she managed a small smile. Just making sure this proposal is perfect, Mr. Clark. It's important to you. He set the coffee down, leaning against her desk closer than propriety allowed. It's important to us, he corrected, his eyes locking onto hers. This project, it's personal. I want to make a difference, not just profits. His sincerity caught her off guard, peeling back a layer of the man she'd thought untouchable. She blurted before she could stop herself. Why does it matter so much to you? The question hung between them, bold and unguarded, and for a moment, she feared she'd crossed a line. Eric's gaze softened, a shadow of vulnerability crossing his features. My mother believed in using what you have to lift others. He said, his voice quieter now, tinged with a pain he rarely showed. She was a musician who poured her soul into every note. When I was a kid, she'd play for community centers, places where people needed hope. I want to honor that. Harper's heart ached at his words, seeing not the icy CEO, but a man carrying a legacy of love and loss. Emboldened by the moment, she stood gesturing toward her desk, where a small speaker sat. She said, "Let me show you something," her voice trembling with nerves and excitement. She connected her phone, and the soulful strains of Nina Simone's Feeling Good filled the air, its raw emotion wrapping around them like a warm embrace. She said, "This is what got me through tough days in Harlem," her eyes distant with memory. Music was my escape, my way of dreaming bigger than my circumstances. Eric listened, his expression unreadable, yet captivated, as if the music had unlocked a door within him. When the song ended, he stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're full of surprises, Harper. I never would have guessed you were a soul music girl." She laughed, a genuine sound that broke the tension. "And I never thought you'd care about community centers." She teased the words, slipping out before she could stop them. His smile widened, a rare crack in his polished facade, and the weight of her secret felt lighter for a moment. "Stay for a bit," he said, almost a plea. "I've got something to show you too." He led her to his office, where a turntable sat in a corner, a relic from another time. He selected a vinyl, Billie Holiday's Solitude, and as the haunting melody filled the room, he spoke of his mother's late-night piano sessions, how they'd shaped his dreams before the world hardened him. Harper also shared about growing up in a neighborhood where every corner held a story, where music and resilience were woven into the fabric of life. The conversation flowed effortlessly, their words weaving a fragile bridge between their worlds. But as the night deepened, so did Harper's fear. Each shared story, each lingering glance, made her secret feel like a betrayal. She wanted to tell him about the night at the plaza, the earring, the fire he'd ignited within her, but the risk was too significant. What if he saw her as a mistake? a scandal waiting to erupt. The thought twisted like a knife, and she excused herself, claiming fatigue though her heart screamed to stay. She opened her laptop at her desk and stared back at the draft resignation letter. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but the memory of Eric's voice, soft and unguarded, held her back. She closed the laptop, her resolve crumbling under the weight of something dangerous hope. As she left the office, the city lights twinkling below, she felt his presence lingering, a promise and a peril she couldn't escape. Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Eric sat alone, the silver hoop earring glinting in his hand. He turned it over his mind, replaying the night at the plaza, the laughter, the warmth, the woman who'd slipped through his fingers. He didn't know it was Harper, but something in his heart whispered that she was more than just his assistant. And as he stared out at the city, a quiet resolve took root. He would find her no matter the cost. The Houston skyline glowed under a fiery Texas sunset, its glass spires casting long shadows over the bustling city. Harper Martin stood in the heart of a sleek convention center, her tablet clutched tightly as she navigated the chaos of Clark Innovation's latest tech summit. The air buzzed with the hum of ambition, executives in tailored suits, tech moguls with hungry eyes, and the faint clink of wine glasses signaling deals in the making. Harper, ever the meticulous assistant, moved with practiced grace, ensuring every event detail ran smoothly. Yet beneath her polished exterior, a storm raged. The secret of her night with Eric Clark, the missing earring, and the weight of her unspoken truth pressed against her chest like a vice. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, the screen flashing Brenda's name for the third time that day. Harper's stomach twisted, knowing what awaited. She slipped into a quiet corner, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and answered with a forced calm. "Mom, I'm working," she said, her voice low but firm. Brenda's response was sharp, cutting through the line like a blade. "Please don't give me that, Harper. Jamal's wedding is in 2 months, and we need $15,000 for the venue. You're out with your fancy boss acting too good for us. Get it done." The accusation stung a familiar wound that never healed. Harper's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not a bank, Mom. I'm trying to keep my life together." But Brenda's scoff was merciless. "You owe us, girl. Don't forget who raised you." The call ended abruptly, leaving Harper staring at the blank screen, her heart heavy with guilt and resentment. She returned to the summit, her composure a fragile mask. The crowd parted as Eric appeared, his presence commanding the room. His suit, a deep navy that hugged his frame, accentuated the quiet intensity that made him untouchable. He was deep in conversation with a group of investors, but his gaze flicked to Harper, a silent acknowledgement that sent a shiver through her. She busied herself with her tablet organizing schedules, but the memory of their late-night talk over Billie Holiday's music lingered, a dangerous warmth that threatened to unravel her defenses. The evening's keynote address showcased Clark Innovation's vision, and Eric took the stage with effortless charisma. His speech about bridging the digital divide and bringing technology to communities left behind was met with applause. But Harper felt the weight of eyes on her. As Eric's assistant, she was a visible extension of his world. Yet whispers followed her subtle, cutting remarks about her place in this elite circle. A silver-haired executive leaned toward his colleague, his voice low but audible. "She's sharp, but does she really belong here? Clark could have anyone." The words sliced through Harper, a reminder of the invisible barriers she faced daily. She straightened her chin, lifting with quiet defiance, but the sting lingered. Eric, descending from the stage, caught her eye. He crossed the room, ignoring the hands extended for greetings, and stopped beside her. "You did an incredible job pulling this together," he said, his voice low, meant only for her. His hand brushed her arm, a fleeting touch that sent her pulse racing. But you look like you're carrying the world. What's wrong? His concern, so genuine, pierced her carefully constructed walls. Harper forced a smile, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Just family stuff, Mr. Clark. Nothing I can't handle. But his eyes, sharp and searching, seemed to see through her lie. You don't have to hold it alone, he said softly, the words a quiet promise that made her heart ache. A commotion at the edge of the room shattered the moment. A group of executives gathered, their murmurs growing louder. Harper overheard a snippet about her fit with Clark Innovations, her role questioned in hushed tones that carried a sting of prejudice. She felt the room shrink, the air thick with judgment. Sensing her tension, Eric stepped closer, his voice cutting through the noise. Ms. Martin is indispensable to this company, he said loud enough for the room to hear. Her vision shapes our future. Anyone who doubts that can take it up with me. His words were a shield, bold and unyielding, and the crowd fell silent, their eyes darting away. Harper's breath caught gratitude, and something more profound, something forbidden blooming in her chest. Later, at a rooftop reception under the starlit Houston sky, Harper stood by the railing, the city sprawling beneath her like a canvas of dreams and doubts. The weight of Brenda's demands, the summit's whispers, and the secret she carried, pressed heavier than ever. She sipped sparkling water, her mind racing. Quitting was still an option to escape the risk of Eric discovering the truth about their night together. But the thought of leaving him, of walking away from the man who saw her in ways no one else did, felt like a betrayal of her heart. Eric found her there, his presence, a quiet anchor in the chaos. He leaned against the railing, his shoulder brushing hers, the scent of his cologne, sandalwood, and cedar stirring memories she fought to suppress. You're avoiding me, he said, his tone half teasing, half serious. Harper's lips curved into a reluctant smile. I'm just keeping things professional, Mr. Clark. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that thrilled her. Professional doesn't mean hiding, Harper. You're part of this part of me. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and for a moment she wanted to confess everything, the night, the earring, the fear that consumed her. But before she could speak, her phone buzzed again. Another message from Brenda. Don't let us down. Harper, Jamal's counting on you. The words were a cold splash of reality, pulling her back from the edge of vulnerability. She tucked the phone away, her heart sinking. Eric watched her, his expression unreadable but soft. You can tell me whatever's weighing on you, he said, his voice a gentle plea. I'm not just your boss. The sincerity in his eyes was almost too much a temptation to bare her soul. But fear held her back, a shadow over the fragile connection they'd built. As the night wound down, Harper returned to her hotel room, the city's lights a distant hum beyond her window. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she opened her laptop. The resignation letter was still there, a lifeline to escape the chaos. But Eric's words, his defense, his warmth echoed in her mind, a dangerous lure that made her hesitate. She closed the laptop, her heart torn between running and staying, between fear and the flicker of something she dared not name, love. In his suite across the city, Eric stood by his window, the silver hoop earring in his hand. His mind replayed the summit, Harper's quiet strength, how she'd stood tall despite the whispers. He didn't know she was the woman from that night, but something in his soul stirred a certainty that she was more than he'd ever expected. And as the Houston skyline glittered below, he vowed to uncover the truth, unaware that it would change everything. The Houston morning dawned with a humid haze, the city's pulse a relentless hum beyond the glass walls of Harper Martin's hotel room. She stood before the mirror, her reflection a mask of composure hiding the chaos. The summit had ended, but its echoes lingered, the whispers of judgment, Eric Clark's fierce defense, and the weight of her family's demands. Yet none of these compared to the secret she now carried, a truth that had upended her world. A faint nausea had plagued her for days, dismissed as stress, until a quiet visit to a Harlem clinic before the trip confirmed the impossible. She was pregnant, the child, a living echo of that forbidden night at the plaza. Harper's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the sink, her breath shallow. The memory of Eric's touch, the reckless passion under starlit skies, felt like a dream tainted by dread. This child, a fragile spark of life, was both a miracle and a catastrophe. What would Eric think? That she'd planned this, a calculated move to trap him? The thought twisted her heart, a fear amplified by the world's scrutiny of a woman like her in his orbit. She pressed a hand to her stomach, a silent vow to protect the life within. But the cost of her silence loomed like a gathering storm. At the convention center for the summit's final meetings, Harper performed her duties with mechanical precision, her tablet a shield against the world. Eric was everywhere, his voice commanding discussions, his presence a magnet that drew her gaze despite her efforts to resist. He stood at the front of a boardroom, outlining partnerships with local tech hubs, his confidence unwavering. Yet his eyes found her often a quiet intensity that made her pulse race. She wondered if he sensed her turmoil, if those sharp eyes could see the secret she guarded so fiercely. During a break, Harper slipped away to a quiet lounge, needing a moment to breathe. She sipped ginger tea, a remedy for the nausea that threatened to betray her, and stared out at the sprawling city. Her phone buzzed. Lena, her rock, her voice of reason. "Harper, you're not yourself," Lena said, her tone firm but laced with worry. "Whatever's going on, you need to tell him. You can't carry this alone." Harper's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. "I can't, Lena. If he knows, what if he thinks I'm using him? What if it ruins everything?" Lena's sigh was heavy. "You're not giving him a chance to prove you wrong, and that baby deserves a father who knows." The words struck deep, but fear held Harper captive. She ended the call, her resolve wavering. Returning to the boardroom, she found Eric alone reviewing notes. He looked up, his expression softening. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice a low rumble that stirred something deep within her. "Is it still family trouble?" Harper forced a smile, her heart pounding. "Just navigating some things, Mr. Clark. I'll manage." But his gaze lingered, searching, as if he could sense the weight she carried. "You don't have to manage alone," he said, stepping closer, his hand brushing hers. The touch was electric, a reminder of the night that bound them, and Harper pulled back, her breath catching. The day blurred into a whirlwind of meetings, but their tension grew a silent current that crackled with every glance. At a networking dinner that evening, Harper stood by Eric's side, playing her role flawlessly. The room was a sea of polished smiles and veiled judgments, and she felt the weight of eyes on her executives who questioned her presence, their whispers a soft poison. One woman, her voice dripping with condescension, remarked to a colleague, "She's capable, but is she really the right fit for Clark's vision?" The words were a dagger, sharp and familiar, but Harper held her head high, her smile a shield. Sensing the shift in her demeanor, Eric leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "Ignore them," he murmured, his voice a quiet vow. "You're more than they'll ever understand." His words were a lifeline, pulling her from the edge of doubt and deep fear. How could she tell him about the child when the world judged her harshly? The thought of losing his respect, of being seen as a scandal, was unbearable. As the dinner ended, Harper excused herself to the balcony, the Houston night alive with stars and the distant hum of traffic. She leaned against the railing, her hands trembling as she touched her stomach, a silent promise to the life within. The nausea came in waves now, a reminder of the truth she couldn't escape. She wanted this child to believe in a future where they could be a family. But the risks, Eric's reaction, her family's greed. The world's scrutiny loomed like shadows. Eric found her there, his presence a quiet storm. He stood beside her, his shoulder brushing hers, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. He said, "You're running from something," his voice soft but piercing. "I see it, Harper. You don't have to hide from me." His words were a plea, a temptation to confess, but fear closed her lips. She turned to him, her smile fragile. "It's just been a long week." She lied, her voice barely above a whisper, but his hand found hers warm and steady, and for a moment she imagined a world where she could tell him everything, where he'd hold her close, not push her away. A text from Brenda broke the moment. "You're letting us down, Harper. Jamal's wedding needs you. Don't be selfish." The words were a cold slap, pulling her back to reality. She slipped her hand from Eric's, her heart aching. She said, "I should get back to work," turning away, but his voice stopped her. "Harper, I'm here. Whenever you're ready." The sincerity in his tone was a knife cutting through her defenses, but she couldn't risk it, not yet. Harper sat on the bed in her room, her laptop open to the resignation letter she'd never sent. The cursor blinked, a taunting reminder of her indecision. She closed her eyes, picturing Eric's face, how he'd defended her, the warmth of his hand. But the secret of the child, their child, loomed larger than ever, a truth that could either bind them or break them. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering, "We'll be okay, though." Doubt gnawed at her. Across the city, in his penthouse suite, Eric sat with the silver hoop earring in his hand, its delicate curve catching the light. His mind was a tangle of questions. The mystery woman from that night was a ghost he couldn't shake. Harper's face kept surfacing, her strength, vulnerability, and how she made him feel alive. He didn't know she held the key to his search, but his heart whispered that she was more than his assistant. As the city hummed below, he vowed to uncover the truth, unaware of the storm it would unleash. The Houston night draped the city in a velvet shroud, its skyline a constellation of ambition and secrets. Harper Martin stood in the softly lit suite of the Four Seasons, her fingers tracing the edge of a glass coffee table, as she tried to steady her racing heart. The weight of her pregnancy, a fragile secret nestled within her, pressed heavier with each passing day. The summit had ended, but its echoes Eric's protective words. The sting of whispered judgments and her mother's relentless demands followed her like shadows. She had dodged the truth with Eric, her boss, and the man who haunted her dreams, but each moment with him felt like a step closer to a precipice she wasn't ready to face. A knock at the door jolted her from her thoughts. Eric stood in the hallway, his suit jacket discarded, and his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. His presence filled the space, a quiet storm that caught her breath. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and urgent, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Harper's pulse quickened, fear mingling with the pull of his nearness. Had he discovered something? Did he know about the night that bound them, the child she carried in silence? He closed the door, the click echoing like a warning. "I've been watching you, Harper," he began, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. "You're carrying something heavy, not just work or family. But I need you to hear me out before you decide to run." His words were a blade cutting through her defenses, and she clutched the back of a chair to steady herself. "I'm not running," she lied, her voice softer than intended, betraying the tremor within. Eric paced his usual composure, fraying at the edges. "My stepmother, Victoria, is tightening her grip on the company," he said, his tone laced with frustration. "She's pushing me to marry Sophia Reed, my ex, to secure some outdated vision of the Clark legacy. Sophia's all charm and ambition. She wants the spotlight. Not me, but Victoria sees her as the perfect pawn. Harper's heart sank at the mention of Sophia, a woman whose name carried the weight of a past she couldn't compete with. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked, though a part of her dreaded the answer. Eric stopped turning to face her, his gaze fierce yet vulnerable. "I need a way out, Harper, to keep Victoria at bay without losing control of everything I've built. Please marry me." The words hung in the air, a thunderclap that stole her breath. "A contract." He clarified his voice, steadying. "1 year of fake marriage. I'll pay you $2 million, enough to silence your family's demands to give you freedom. It's a business deal, nothing more." But his eyes, burning with something unspoken, told a different story. Harper's mind reeled, the room spinning, as she processed his words. Marry Eric Clark. The man whose touch still lingered in her dreams, whose child she carried secretly. It was madness, a dangerous dance that could unravel her carefully guarded truth. The money was a lifeline, a way to escape Brenda's relentless pressure. But the cost was her heart already teetering on the edge of love. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You could have anyone." He stepped closer, his hand hovering near her cheek, as if afraid to touch her. "Because you're real, Harper. You don't play games. You challenge me, make me see the world differently. I trust you." His words were a velvet trap, pulling her deeper into a longing she couldn't afford. She wanted to say yes, to step into his world, but the secret of their child loomed like a specter. What if he found out? Would he see it as a betrayal, a complication to his carefully laid plans? "I need time," she said, her voice barely audible, turning toward the window to hide the tears threatening to spill. The city lights blurred a mirror to her chaotic emotions. Eric nodded, his expression unreadable but soft. "Take all the time you need. But know this, I'm not letting you slip away." His words were a vow, a promise that thrilled and terrified her. He left the suite, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Harper alone with her thoughts. She sank onto the couch, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach, where the faint flutter of life reminded her of the stakes. The proposal was a lifeline, but also a chain binding her to Eric in ways she wasn't ready for. She imagined saying yes, living in his world, sharing stolen moments in his penthouse, but the fear of her secret being exposed held her back. What if Victoria or Sophia used it against her? What if Eric saw her as a liability, not a partner? The next morning, Harper joined Eric for a final meeting with Houston tech leaders. She played her role flawlessly, but every glance from him felt like a spotlight probing for the truth she hid. At a coffee break, she overheard two executives discussing Eric's unconventional choice of assistant, their words dripping with condescension. "She's talented, but she's not one of us," one said, the implication clear. Harper's jaw tightened, but she refused to let their words break her. Eric, catching the exchange, stepped in, his voice cold. "Ms. Martin's work speaks for itself. Question her, and you question me." His defense was a shield, but it only deepened her turmoil. How could she accept his proposal when her secret could shatter his trust? That evening, back in the suite, Harper stood on the balcony, the humid air clinging to her skin. Her phone buzzed, Lena checking in. "Did you tell him?" Lena asked, her voice a mix of hope and frustration. Harper shook her head, though her friend couldn't see. "He asked me to marry him, Lena. A fake marriage for business. $2 million. Lena's gasp crackled through the line. "Harper, that's your way out. But you can't keep that baby a secret forever. He deserves to know." Harper's throat tightened. "I'm scared, Lena. Afraid he'll hate me." She ended the call, her gaze fixed on the city below. The money could silence Brenda and free her from the chains of her family's expectations, but it couldn't erase the truth growing within her. She imagined a life with Eric not as a contract, but as something real. But the risk was too significant. Yet as she stood there, his words echoed, "I trust you." They were a lifeline, a temptation to believe in a future where love could conquer fear. Eric sat at his desk in his suite, the silver hoop earring glinting under the lamplight. His mind was a tangle of strategy and longing, Victoria's schemes, Sophia's manipulations, and Harper's quiet strength. He didn't know she held the key to his mystery, but his heart whispered that she was the answer to more than just his business problems. As the city hummed below, he made a silent vow he would convince her to say yes, unaware that their fates were already entwined by a secret that could change everything. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a jeweled crown, its lights casting a restless glow over the city that never surrendered to sleep. Harper Martin stood in the penthouse she now shared with Eric Clark, her fingers tracing the cool glass of a floor-to-ceiling window. The fake marriage proposal, a contract born of necessity, had pulled her into his world, a dazzling yet dangerous place, where every glance between them felt like a spark threatening to ignite her carefully guarded secret. The child growing within her, a silent promise from that reckless night, was a truth she couldn't yet voice its weight, both a comfort and a chain. Each day in Eric's orbit drew her closer to him, yet the fear of exposure kept her silent. The penthouse was a sanctuary of modern elegance, its minimalist decor softened by touches. Harper had added a vibrant quilt from her grandmother, a small shelf of vinyl records. The air felt heavy tonight, charged with an unspoken tension. Eric had been distant all day, his usual warmth replaced by a restless energy she couldn't decipher. She wondered if he suspected something, if the silver hoop earring he sought was closing in on her like a hunter's snare. Her phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. A message from Lena. Check X now. Sophia's playing dirty. Harper's heart sank as she opened the app, her screen flooded with posts from an anonymous account. Grainy photos showed her laughing with Ryan, an old college friend, at a Harlem cafe months ago. The captions were venomous. Is Clark Innovations' star assistant cheating on her boss? The comments were a torrent of vitriol laced with barbs about her place in Eric's world, questioning her loyalty, her worth. Harper's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she scrolled. Sophia Reed, Eric's ex, had struck her jealousy, a blade aimed at Harper's heart. She sank onto the plush sofa, the city's glow a mocking backdrop to her turmoil. The accusations weren't true, but the damage was real, each comment a reminder of the scrutiny she faced as an outsider in Eric's elite circle. She wanted to fight back, to confront Sophia, but the secret of her pregnancy made her vulnerable. What if this scandal pushed Eric to dig deeper, to uncover the truth she wasn't ready to share? Eric entered the penthouse, his presence a quiet storm. He tossed his jacket over a chair, his expression darkening as he glanced at her phone. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice low-laced with concern. Harper hesitated, then handed him the device, her heart pounding. He scrolled through the posts, his jaw tightening with each swipe. "Sophia," he muttered, his tone a mix of anger and resignation. "She's desperate to tear us apart." He looked up, his eyes locking onto hers, fierce yet tender. "You don't believe this garbage, do you, about us?" Harper shook her head, her throat tight. "It's not about believing it. It's about what everyone else thinks. They're tearing me apart, Eric." Her voice cracked, betraying the vulnerability she'd fought to hide. He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling before her, his hands framing her face. "Let them talk," he said, his voice a vow. "You're not just my assistant, Harper. You're my partner in this, and I won't let anyone hurt you." His touch was a lifeline, warm and steady, but it only deepened her fear. How could she be his partner when she hid such a monumental truth? The next day, at a Clark Innovations gala in a glittering Manhattan ballroom, the tension followed them. Harper stood by Eric's side, her elegant dress a shield against the prying eyes of New York's elite. Sophia was there, her presence a calculated intrusion, her smile sharp as she mingled with investors. Harper felt her gaze like a predator's waiting for a misstep. During a quiet moment, Sophia cornered her near the bar, her voice low and venomous. "You think you can hold on to him?" she hissed, her eyes glinting with malice. "Eric needs someone who belongs in his world, not a pretender playing house." Harper's blood boiled, but she held her voice steady. "His world is changing, Sophia, and he's choosing me." The words were bold, but doubt gnawed at her. She slipped away to a secluded alcove, her heart racing. The pregnancy was a silent weight, its presence growing harder to conceal. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering a promise to the life within. "I'll protect you." But the fear of Sophia's schemes, of the world's judgment, threatened to drown her resolve. Eric found her there, his presence a quiet anchor. He said, "You don't have to face her alone." His hand brushing hers, sending a jolt through her. "We're in this together." His words were a temptation, a call to confess, but fear held her tongue. That evening, Eric took action. At a press conference to unveil a new tech initiative, he addressed the rumors head-on, his voice unwavering. He declared that Harper Martin is my partner in business, and beyond his gaze finding her in the crowd, anyone who questions her answers to me. The room erupted in murmurs, but his words were a shield, a public vow that made her heart soar and ache. The media frenzy intensified, X buzzing with hashtags like #Clark controversy, some praising his loyalty, others casting doubt. Harper felt the weight of it all, her secret, a ticking clock. Back at the penthouse, they sat on the balcony, the city's lights a canvas of dreams and dangers. Eric poured her a glass of sparkling water, his fingers brushing hers a touch that lingered too long. "You were incredible tonight," he said, his voice soft but intense. "You make me want to be better." Harper. His confession was a spark igniting a longing she couldn't suppress. She tried to tell him about the child, about the love blossoming within her, but the risk was too significant. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice trembling. "You make me feel seen." She whispered the words, carrying more weight than she intended. Their eyes locked, the air crackling with unspoken truths. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her, but her phone buzzed, shattering the spell. A message from Brenda. "You're embarrassing us with this scandal. Fix it or don't bother coming home." The words were a cold slap, pulling her back to reality. She stood abruptly, her heart pounding. "I need air," she said, stepping back, though every fiber of her wanted to stay. Alone on the balcony, Harper clutched the railing, the city's pulse a mirror to her own. Sophia's attack. Brenda's demands and the child she carried were a storm closing in. She couldn't run forever, but the thought of losing Eric, of facing his judgment, was a wound too deep to bear. In his study, Eric held the silver hoop earring, his mind replaying Harper's words, her touch. He didn't know she was the woman he sought, but his heart whispered that she was the key to everything. As the city hummed below, he vowed to protect her, unaware of the truth that would unravel them both. The Manhattan morning unfolded in a symphony of steel and glass, the city's heartbeat pulsing through the towering headquarters of Clark Innovations. Harper Martin stood in the sleek lobby, her tablet clutched like a lifeline. Her composure, a fragile veneer over the storm within. The fake marriage to Eric Clark had woven their lives closer, each shared moment in their penthouse, a thread tightening around her heart. Yet the secret of her pregnancy, a delicate life tied to that fateful night, remained a silent weight, threatening to unravel everything. Sophia's vicious social media attack still lingered, its venom seeping into Harper's thoughts. But the looming shadow of her family now cast the darkest cloud. Harper's phone had been silent since Brenda's last biting message, but the reprieve felt ominous, like the calm before a tempest. She moved through her tasks, precisely coordinating Eric's schedule for a critical board meeting, but her mind was elsewhere, haunted by the fear that her secret could destroy the fragile trust she and Eric had built. His defense at the press conference, calling her his partner, had ignited a hope she dared not embrace. Yet the risk of confession kept her silent, her heart caught between longing and dread. The lobby's tranquility was shattered when raised voices echoed from the reception desk. Harper's blood ran cold as she recognized the sharp cadence of Brenda's voice, laced with accusation. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble, and saw her mother. Brenda standing with Jamal, her brother, and Marcus, her stepfather. A jarring intrusion in the polished space. Employees paused, their eyes darting between Harper and the trio, the air thick with curiosity. Harper. Martin. Are you too good for us now? Brenda's voice cut through the hum, sharp and unyielding. Living in that fancy penthouse, ignoring your family's needs. Harper's chest tightened, the familiar sting of guilt warring with defiance. Mom. This isn't the place. She said, her voice low but firm, her gaze steady despite the tremor in her hands. Marcus stepped forward, his posture menacing. Jamal's wedding needs $15,000, Harper. You work for a billionaire. Don't act like you're broke. Jamal, usually quiet, added, his tone bitter. You're parading around as his wife, but you can't spare a dime for your own blood. The words were a blade slicing through her resolve, and Harper felt the weight of every sacrifice she'd made for them, every late night, every paycheck drained to keep them afloat. Before she could respond, a shadow loomed behind her. Eric emerged from the elevator, his presence a quiet storm that silenced the room. His eyes sharp and commanding, flicked from Harper's distressed expression to her family's aggressive stances. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice calm, but laced with an authority that made the air crackle. Brenda faltered, but Marcus squared his shoulders. This is family business, Mr. Clark. Stay out of it. Eric's smile was razor sharp, devoid of warmth. When it involves my fiancée, it's my business, he said. The word fiancé is a deliberate declaration that sends a ripple through the onlookers. Harper's breath caught. The public claimed a shield and a chain binding her closer to him. He stepped beside her, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a protective and possessive gesture. Harper, do you want them here? He asked, his voice softening for her alone. She shook her head, her throat tight. No. She whispered the word, a quiet rebellion against years of obligation. Eric nodded to security, who swiftly escorted Brenda, Marcus, and Jamal into the bustling street. Brenda's protests echoed, but Harper stood frozen, her heart a battlefield of relief and guilt. Eric guided her to a private conference room, the city's pulse muffled by glass walls. The door closed, sealing them in a cocoon of quiet. Are you okay? He asked, his hand hovering near her cheek, unsure whether to touch her. Harper nodded, but the weight of the confrontation threatened to spill over. They've always been like this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Always demanding, always taking. I thought working here, building something for myself, would change things, but it's only made it worse. Her eyes glistened, and she turned away, ashamed of her vulnerability. Eric's jaw tightened, a flicker of anger in his gaze, not at her, but at the injustice. You don't owe them your life, Harper, he said, stepping closer, his voice a steady anchor. You're more than their demands. You're everything to me. The confession hung between them raw and unguarded, and Harper's heart stuttered. She wanted to tell him about the child and the love blossoming within her, but the fear of losing him and shattering their fragile bond held her back. Instead, she reached for his hand, her fingers trembling as they intertwined with his. "Thank you," she whispered, the words carrying more weight than she could express. That evening in the penthouse, they sat on the plush sofa, a jazz record spinning softly, its notes weaving through the air like a lover's caress. Harper, emboldened by the day's chaos, let slip a truth. She said, "I've always felt like I'm fighting to be enough," her eyes tracing the city lights beyond the window. "For my family, for this world, for you." Eric's gaze softened, his fingers brushing a stray curl from her face. "You're more than enough." "Harper," he said, his voice a vow, "you make me want to fight for something real." His words were a flame warming her heart, but they also deepened her fear. The secret of their child was a wall between them, one she wasn't ready to tear down. Their moment was interrupted by a buzz from Harper's phone, a message from Lena Sophia's stirring up more trouble on X. "Be careful." Harper opened the app, her heart sinking as she saw new posts, this time hinting at her questionable past, with manipulated photos of her with Ryan. The comments were brutal, a reminder of the world's eagerness to tear her down. Eric, seeing her distress, took the phone, his expression darkening. "This ends now," he said, his voice a low growl. "I'll handle Sophia." But Harper shook her head, her voice trembling. "It's not just her, Eric. It's everything. I don't know how much longer I can keep up." He pulled her close, his arms a fortress against the world. "You don't have to do it alone," he murmured, his lips brushing her forehead. The warmth of his embrace was a promise, but the secret she carried grew heavier, a ticking clock she couldn't ignore. As she leaned into him, the city's lights a backdrop to their fragile bond, Harper knew the truth was closing in. Eric held the silver hoop earring in his study, his mind a tangle of determination and longing. He didn't know Harper was the woman he sought, but his heart whispered that she was the key to his future. As the city hummed below, he vowed to shield her, unaware of the storm her secret would unleash. The Houston night was a tapestry of stars and secrets, its warm breeze carrying the hum of a city alive with possibilities. Harper Martin stood on the balcony of their Four-Seasons suite, her hands gripping the railing as if it could anchor her against the storm within. The fake marriage to Eric Clark had woven their lives into a delicate dance, each shared moment in their penthouse, a step closer to a love she both craved and feared. The secret of her pregnancy, a fragile life born from that reckless night, was a truth she'd guarded fiercely, but the weight of it now threatened to shatter the fragile trust they'd built. Sophia's vicious social media attacks and her family's relentless demands had pushed her to the edge, but it was the looming truth, confirmed by a restored video from the plaza, that held her heart in a vice. Harper's phone buzzed, a message from Lena flashing across the screen. "Ken's got the footage. It's you, Harper. Tell him before it's too late." Her breath caught panic clawing at her chest. The silver hoop earring, the one piece of evidence tying her to that night, was no longer a ghost, but a reality closing in. She pressed a hand to her stomach, feeling the faint flutter of the life within, a silent plea for courage. She wanted to confess and lay bare the truth to Eric, but the fear of his rejection, of being seen as a schemer, kept her silent. The city's lights blurred before her eyes, a mirror to the chaos in her soul. Eric entered the suite, his presence a quiet tempest that filled the room. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair slightly tousled, but his eyes were sharp, carrying a weight that made her heart stutter. "Harper," he said, his voice low and raw, holding up his phone. "Ken sent me the restored footage from the plaza. It's you." The words were a thunderclap stripping away her defenses. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. "Is it true?" he asked, stepping closer. His gaze a mix of shock and something more profound, hope perhaps, or longing. Tears welled in Harper's eyes, her voice breaking as she nodded. "It's true," she whispered, the confession spilling like a river breaking its banks. "That night, it was me, and I'm pregnant, Eric, with your child." The silence that followed was deafening, a precipice where their future hung in balance. She braced for anger, for betrayal, but instead Eric knelt before her, his hands cupping her face with a tenderness that stole her breath. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes searching hers for answers. "I was scared," she admitted, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Frightened you'd think I planned it, that I was using you. Afraid of what the world would say of losing you." Her words were a raw wound, laid bare in the suite's quiet. Eric's thumb brushed away a tear, his touch a lifeline in the storm. "You're not a mistake, Harper," he said, his voice steady but fervent. "You're everything. This child, our child, is a gift." His confession was a flame igniting a hope she'd long suppressed, but it also deepened her fear. The world outside their cocoon was unforgiving, and the truth was now a weapon in the wrong hands. Eric pulled her into his arms, his lips brushing her forehead, a vow woven into his touch. "I've loved you since the day you challenged me in that boardroom," he murmured, his voice a soft rumble against her skin. "Your fire, your heart. It's what I've been searching for." Harper melted into him, her heart soaring and breaking all at once. The love she'd fought to deny was real, but the danger was far from over. Victoria Clark, his stepmother, had eyes everywhere, and Sophia's schemes had proven her ruthless. If they knew about the pregnancy, it could be twisted into a scandal to destroy them both. The next morning, Harper and Eric faced a new challenge, a meeting with Clark Innovations Board, where Victoria's influence loomed large. Harper stood by Eric's side, her role as his fiancée a public shield, but her heart raced with the knowledge of their shared secret. Victoria was there, her smile a mask of civility, but her eyes glinted with malice. "Eric, dear," she said, her voice honeyed, "the board has concerns about your unconventional choices. Stability is key to the company's future." The implication was clear, a veiled attack on Harper's presence, and the room's murmurs grew louder, a chorus of doubt. Eric's hand found Harper's beneath the table, his grip a silent promise. "Harper is my partner," he declared, his voice unwavering. "She's the future of this company, and I won't let anyone question that." His words were a defiance, a public claim that sent a thrill through her, but Harper felt the weight of Victoria's gaze, sharp and calculating. She knew the truth. Ken had warned Eric that Victoria's team had accessed the footage, and the pregnancy was no longer just their secret. In the penthouse, Harper stood by the kitchen island that evening, preparing a simple meal of cornbread and greens, a ritual to ground herself. Eric joined her, his sleeves rolled up, a playful smile, softening his features as he attempted to knead the dough under her guidance. "You're hopeless at this," she teased, brushing flour from his cheek, and for a moment, the world's weight lifted. Their laughter filled the space, a fragile bubble of joy, but Harper's heart ached with the knowledge that Victoria's next move was coming. Her phone buzzed, a message from Lena. "Victoria's planning something big. Be ready." Harper's smile faded, and Eric noticed his hand stilling on hers. "What is it?" he asked, his voice soft but urgent. She hesitated, then showed him the message, her heart pounding. "She knows about us," Harper said, her voice trembling about the baby. Eric's expression darkened, but he pulled her close, his arms a fortress. He vowed she won't touch you, his lips against her hair. "I'll protect you both." But as they stood there, the city's lights a backdrop to their fragile love, Harper felt the storm closing in. Victoria's schemes were a shadow, and the truth now laid bare was both a liberation and a danger. She clung to Eric, her heart torn between the love she'd found and the fear of what lay ahead. In his study, Eric sat with the silver hoop earring, its delicate curve a reminder of the night that had changed everything. He didn't know how Victoria would strike, but he knew one thing. Harper and their child were his future, and he would fight for them with everything he had. As the city hummed below, their love stood on the edge of a precipice, ready to face the tempest together. The Manhattan spring bloomed in a riot of cherry blossoms, their delicate petals drifting like soft promises over Central Park. Harper Martin stood beneath a canopy of blooms on the Bow Bridge, her flowing white gown shimmering like moonlight, its intricate beadwork a tribute to her heritage. The gentle curve of her post-pregnancy figure was a testament to the life she and Eric Clark had created, a son Noah, whose bright eyes and gurgles filled their penthouse with joy. Today they would renew their vows, not as a contract born of necessity, but as a celebration of a love forged through storms, a vow to face the world together. The past months had been a crucible testing their bond against Victoria Clark's schemes and the relentless demands of Harper's family. The revelation of Harper's pregnancy, confirmed by the restored plaza footage, had laid bare their truth, binding them closer, even as it invited danger. Victoria had seized the knowledge, her ambition, a venomous blade aimed at their future. Harper's heart still raced at the memory of Eric's embrace, his vow to protect her and their child. But the battle was far from over. The world's judgment, her family's greed, and Victoria's manipulations loomed like shadows, threatening to eclipse their fragile light. The Clark Innovations boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel, its air thick with tension, as Harper and Eric faced Victoria in a showdown. The board, a mix of allies and skeptics, gathered to discuss the company's future. But Victoria's agenda was clear. She stood her elegance a mask for malice, her voice dripping with false concern. She declared that Eric's choices threaten our legacy, her eyes flicking to Harper. Our investors will never accept a child born under such questionable circumstances. The words were a calculated strike, twisting Harper's pregnancy into a scandal. The room murmured doubt rippling through the air, and Harper felt the weight of every eye on her. Eric's hand found hers beneath the table, his grip a silent vow. He stood his presence commanding the room like a storm. He said that Harper is my partner, my love, and the mother of my child, his voice unwavering, resonant with conviction. Our son Noah is the future of this company, a future built on integrity, not manipulation. Victoria's schemes end here. He presented evidence, meticulously gathered by his team, of Victoria's attempts to sabotage their initiatives, her leaks to the press, and her efforts to undermine Harper. The board's mood shifted, their murmurs turning to outrage. Victoria's smile faltered, her composure cracking, as the chairman called for a vote. By the end, her influence was stripped, her role reduced to a formality, her power shattered. Harper's heart soared, but the victory was bittersweet. The world outside this boardroom was still unkind, its whispers amplified on social media platforms like X, where Sophia's lingering influence fueled speculation about their union. Yet Eric's public defense had sparked a wave of support, hashtags like #LoveUnbound trending, as voices celebrated their story. Harper drew strength from it, but the scars of her family's betrayal lingered. Brenda and Marcus had retreated after their confrontation at Clark Innovations, their silence a cold wall. But Jamal had reached out, his texts, tentative, seeking forgiveness. Harper met Jamal at a quiet Brooklyn diner, the air heavy with unspoken history. She sat across from him, her hands folded tightly, her heart wary but hopeful. She said, "I've carried you all my life," her voice steady but raw. "But I can't be your bank anymore. I have a son now and a family." Jamal's eyes softened, a flicker of remorse breaking through. "I'm sorry, Harper," he said, his voice low. "Mom and Marcus, they pushed too far. I want to be better for you, for Noah." The words were a fragile bridge, a step toward healing, and Harper nodded. A weight lifted, though she knew trust would take time. Harper and Eric prepared for their son's arrival at the penthouse, transforming a guest room into a nursery painted soft blues and greens, a mobile of stars dangling above the crib. One evening, as they assembled the crib, Eric paused, his eyes tracing her silhouette. "You're my home," he said, his voice low, a confession that made her heart flutter. "You and Noah have given me something I never thought I'd have." Harper's throat tightened, doubt lingering. "What if the world never accepts us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if Noah faces what I've faced?" Eric knelt before her, his hands gentle on her waist. "He'll have us," he said, his voice a vow. "We'll teach him to stand tall like you do." The wedding ceremony on the Bow Bridge was intimate, a gathering of close friends and colleagues with Lena as maid of honor, her smile radiant. Harper's gown, designed by a Harlem couturier, shimmered with intricate patterns, a nod to her roots. In a tailored navy suit, Eric looked at her with a love that made the world fade. As they exchanged vows, their words carried the weight of their journey. "Harper," Eric said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You've shown me what it means to fight for love, to build a future against the odds. I promise to stand by you, to love you and Noah with every breath." Tears glistened in Harper's eyes as she spoke. "Eric, you saw me when I felt invisible. You gave me a family, a purpose. I vow to face every storm with you, to raise our son with courage and love." Their kiss was a seal, a promise under the spring sky, and the crowd erupted in applause. Lena tossing a bouquet that Harper caught with a laugh, passing it to her friend with a wink. Noah, cradled by a family friend, gurgled happily, his presence a blessing on their union. The reception in a nearby pavilion celebrated their world soul food, mingling with Eric's classic tastes, jazz weaving through the air. As they danced to a soulful rendition of "At Last," Harper whispered, "We made it." Eric's smile was radiant. "We're just beginning, love." Later on, their penthouse balcony with Noah asleep in his crib, Harper leaned into Eric, the city's lights, a backdrop to their love. The world still held challenges, whispers of doubt, the slow healing with her family, but they had faced worse and emerged stronger. "We're enough," Eric murmured, his lips against her temple, his hand resting on her heart. Harper nodded, a tear slipping free, not of sorrow, but of hope. They had rewritten the rules, and their family was a beacon in a world quick to judge. As the stars emerged over Manhattan, Eric kissed her, a vow to face whatever came next. Harper knew their story was far from over, but she was ready with him by her side. In his arms, with their son's soft breaths echoing nearby, she felt a certainty their love would light the way one day at a time.